Alright, welcome back to the $800 Z project. Hopefully we can get the thing started up today. First we got to figure out what's going on with it. Alright, I'm out here in the Z. The previous owner said there was a problem with the fuel pump wiring, and I'll address that later. He's got it just hooked up to a switch. So I'll turn that on. Hopefully it's on. And start it up, see what happens. Well, a whole lot of nothing. So I guess we'll go through the steps of trying to figure out what's wrong. Alright, so for an engine to run you need three basic things: air, fuel, and of course an ignition spark. So first I'm going to see if we've got a good spark. I'm sure we've got air. There shouldn't really be anything clogging up the intake enough to where the car won't start. So I'm going to grab a spare spark plug, and I'm going to pull the number one spark plug out, or coil wire. Stick our spark plug in there, and then we will find something metal to sit it on to ground it, and see if we've got spark. Alright, so it looks like we have a good spark, so we'll move on to the next step and see if we're getting any fuel. Easiest way to do this is probably just to pull one of the vacuum lines off and spray some starter fluid in it and just see if the car will start. Alright, so I'm going to pull a vacuum line off over here on the intake and take some starter fluid and just spray in one of the vacuum lines, and then turn it over and see what happens. Well, there we go. Not getting any fuel, so I guess we'll figure out what's going on with it. If it needs a fuel pump, or if something's going on with the injectors where they're not firing. So we'll move on to the next step and just figure out if we've got any fuel in the fuel lines. Alright, I'm going to get this fuel line pulled off, the fuel feed, a pair of pliers, and a Phillips head. Snip this line, use the pliers and just kind of twist the line to break it free, and then just slowly pull it off. Whereas this line's pretty old, it's probably just going to rip. So I might just cut it. Alright, so I'm just going to probably replace all the lines in the car anyway. So I'm just going to take a pair of snips and cut our line. I don't see any fuel, nothing dripped out when I cut the line open. So it definitely makes me think we got a problem with our fuel pump. So I guess we can go to the back and check, make sure we have voltage back there, and go from there. We'll see what happens. Alright, so I got the interior pulled back. and we're going to check the wiring at the fuel pump. This is the modification they've done for power. I've got my multimeter, and we're going to check for power and ground, and that'll pretty much help us determine if the fuel pump's bad. So I've got my switch here. When I turn it on, I don't really hear anything, but we'll still check power. So stick one side on one of the leads with it switched on, switch it to ground, and I actually have nothing. Put it on the other side, got 12 volts. So let's remove this switch, because it could be the problem, and just wire it straight. So we got 10 volts, the battery's getting a little low from sitting here running. So we will check for ground now. Let me disconnect the wiring. Disconnect it here, and then switch our multimeter over. So I'm not getting a ground signal, so that could definitely be a problem. Let's see if our fuel pump has ground signal. Alright, so that's showing that it has it's grounded inside the pump, or inside the fuel tank. So it leads me to believe that the pump probably is bad. I can check and hook power straight to the pump and see what that does next, just to be sure. Alright, so what I've done just to test things out is I took and put a T-pin in the back of the connector for the ground, and then I'm going to hook the power back up, and then touching it to the chassis, I don't hear the fuel pump cut on. So definitely leads me to believe that the fuel pump's bad. Could still be something simple like the relay, but with how I've got everything set up, it should bypass the relay. So next step will be pulling down the fuel pump. Alright, so it's the next day. Gonna get the tank dropped. I got a thunderstorm coming in, so I just want to get the tank out, and then I can do everything else in the garage. Went ahead, sprayed the lock nut on the filler neck with some penetrating oil to start getting it loose. I disconnected the cables for the fuel level and the fuel pump and took the cover off. And then next thing I gotta do is get this cover off, and then I'm actually just going to cut all the fuel lines, because I do want to go E85 in this car at some point. Whenever I take the NIS tune out of the black car, it will most likely go in this car, and then I'll get it tuned. So let's get started taking this cover off, and then we'll unbolt the tank. Alright, so there should be 4 10mm bolts. My car only has 3. I'm guessing somebody's already tried to take the gas tank out at some point. So we'll get these taken out. Alright, got that out, and exposes the filler neck. So then we'll have 2 more tins and then a Phillips, and then we'll just take this lock ring off and we'll be good to go. All right, next I'm going to disconnect these 3 lines here. One's feed, return, and then the vent for like the evap system. So I'm just going to cut these because I do plan on replacing them. They're old, and if I do want to run E85, they will definitely burst later because E85 will eat through these old lines. All right, well, I got my lines cut, the feed and the return, and then here's your evap one. So next, gonna loosen the 2 14s on these straps and put a jack under this before you loosen them, and get the tank dropped down. All right, well, I got the tank dropped out. Had to disconnect the vent line that goes to the top of the filler neck and then push it through this hole. Turns out I didn't even have to take this one screw out. So you push that back through and then just slowly drop the tank and you'll get it right out. There it is. All right, so next it'll be taking these 6 8mm bolts out and then getting the fuel pump pulled out once I get those loose, and then we'll take a look at it and see how bad it is. All right, got my 8mm on my drill. Well, these are going to stick. They are pretty old and rusty. You can always kind of thread them back in and then pull your socket off. I'm not too worried about trash and debris getting in the tank. I'm going to clean it out pretty well before I put it back in the car. So, let's see what we got. Yeah, I'd say this pump's had better days. I don't know if I'm going to try and replace the whole sending unit or what I'm going to do. I'll probably at least try and clean it up in the sandblaster. I'll take it to work and get it sandblasted, get it cleaned up, and then get it put back in. So I got the old fuel pump here on the workbench. It's pretty crusty. Definitely going to have to sandblast it and see if it's salvageable. It's pretty bad. I might have to replace some pieces. But here is the new pump I'm going to put in the car. It's an Aeromotive 340 Stealth pump. It's out of another project that I had. Wasn't in there for more than maybe a month. So this should be a pretty good upgrade. Be able to handle the amount of power that I want the car to make in the end. So let's get this pump assembly apart and see how bad it is. Well, the fuel pump's bad. We went through, checked everything, make sure we had air, fuel, and spark, and not getting any fuel. So we pulled the fuel pump out, and it is definitely dead. There's a bunch of rust stuck in the impeller of it. So I've got a new pump, as I showed you. I'm going to take the hanger to work, get that cleaned up. I'm going to clean out the gas tank because it does have a pretty decent layer of varnish on the inside, and it's just going to continue to contaminate the fuel. So I'm going to get that cleaned out and get everything back together on the next episode. That's all I have time for today, but remember to like, comment, subscribe. Stay tuned for more content, and have a good night.